All right. So I do want to welcome, of course, all of you on the call. And for those who don't have their camera on, if you are comfortable, we'll definitely have you flip it on for as much as you can today to create a little more interaction as we go. Let's see who we have on the call today. If you're not comfortable, I totally understand that as well. Or if your bandwidth isn't available, that's fine. So I'm going to turn it over to introduce my speaker. So we have Cody joining us on the call today. We're very lucky. So Cody is the head coach of Canada's AFL team and has been doing that. Cody, it's been a while, like 8 years or something.
Yeah, I've been with the team since 2012.
Yeah, so it's going to be 10 years next year. So that's awesome. Cody is the author of 2 books that I'm very excited to read myself. I've been digging into them a little bit further as we've booked him to speak today. So very excited. He's going to speak a little bit about what he's done in today's chat. And Cody was introduced to us from Jack Henreddy, who's on the call. So one of our CSCA coaches recommended him and pointed me to Cody's podcast, which I sent you guys Cody's website. His podcast is super interesting. I've been listening to it as I do construction on my house. Interviews a whole bunch of really interesting coaches. So very entertaining, Cody. Thank you so much for doing that. And I encourage all of you guys to check it out. It's a good one, talking to real coaches doing, real coaching, which is nice. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cody.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me. I like groups about this size. And I'll just say right from the start, like I don't really want to talk at you guys. I want to talk with you. So I'll do a little bit of a presentation, but I think for this topic in particular around emotions and the emotional toll of coaching, I think it's really helpful that we get some engagement. So just to start with, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat, just drop what sport you come from for me. I won't be able to see it obviously when I present, but I'd love to see the vast array of sports that we come from. I'm going to present from the perspective of professional sport and team sports and head coaches in particular. But really, these are universal problems. And I hope you can see yourself reflected in those problems. So even though it might be something along the lines of, the media going at a head coach during a press conference or something like that, everyone, whether you're a professional or whether you're at amateur level, whether at university level, you can probably see where the overlap is. Like you guys deal with parents maybe, and a pro coach would deal with a media press conference. And so really what I wrote the book about, The Tough Stuff, was universal problems that exist within coaching, but they're told through a lens of high profile people that we think have different problems to us, but actually don't when you dig into it. So let me just take a quick look through. We literally have every sport under the sun. That's amazing. Lawn bowls. As an Australian, that is one of our top sports. I'm glad to see. I didn't know we had a presence in lawn bowls. Awesome. Why don't I jump into presentation mode? So I'm going to present to you on what I've called the tough stuff. So I'm going to start with a story, and I'm kind of going to go through how the book came about, which is called The Tough Stuff. And then we're going to get into some reflections and some questions. But I'll start with a story because it probably paints the best picture of where we're going to go. This guy's name is Brian Correa. We call him Ned. And the reason we call him Ned is because anyone that has a beard like that in Australia is immediately called Ned, because we had a famous bushranger called Ned Kelly. Now, if you're a fan of Heath Ledger, you might have seen him play that role in a Hollywood movie. So literally anyone in our country, me obviously not, this is about 6 months of my growth, but his illustrious beard got him the nickname Ned. Ned was a starting midfielder for us. We were about to go to the International Cup when COVID hit, which is our tri-annual international tournament. About 25 or 30 countries go to Australia every 3 years and play in an international tournament. He was new to new to our team, but had already really made himself a central figure socially and on the field as well. Just before COVID hit, I got a call from Ned's best friend, who's also on our team. And it's difficult to talk about even to this day, but Ned had taken his own life the night before I got the call. So, I mean, just from a footballing perspective, which obviously is not the primary focus here, but from a footballing perspective, he was someone that was working towards what would have been probably his crowning sporting achievement. He'd just been to the gym that night and set his own personal squat record. He'd been to the grocery store and bought himself a week's worth of groceries. And about 30 minutes later, was gone. So obviously very confronting. We spent the night calling all over Canada. We called individually each one of our players, had to tell them one by one. We had 50 players at that stage. So it was 50 calls to young men that you had to make and sit through and cry with them and kind of deal with their their emotions and their reactions and try to guide them as the head coach, which, you know, I've got players that are older than me as well, which not that means anything, but, you know, when you're trying to guide people through that process, it's quite confronting when they're looking to you as a central figure to say, how do we do this? How do we grieve? What can we do now? And so it was obviously very traumatic, personally, very traumatic for our team, something that we needed to work through, still working through, you know, a year later. And then, you know, a couple of weeks after this happened, we also had COVID hit. And so that was kind of the start of this journey that I'm on. And the reason that I'm here is because this, then into COVID, started calling around other coaches as well to see how they were doing. And, you know, it was kind of off the back of finding this quote. Actually, this really impacted me while I was going through my own, sorting through my own personal experience. So I found this quote from Brené Brown, who's obviously, you know, considered a god of vulnerability and emotion in leadership. And in her audiobook, she says, studying leadership is way easier than leading. I completely underestimated the pull on my emotional bandwidth, the determination to stay calm under pressure, and the weight of continuous problem solving and decision making, and the sleepless nights. I'd never seen it really put like that before, where someone from an academic background has then gone into practice, struggled with the practice and said, there wasn't enough in my education to prepare me to actually go into the practice of being a CEO and having to deal with my own staff. She can obviously study this stuff all day long, write as many best-selling books as possible, but then still not be prepared to actually go into the practical nature of it. And so it stood out to me because I felt so unprepared for what happened with Ned. I know everything there is to know about Aussie rules football, but I did not know that that was going to be something, you know, I was going to have 50 sets of eyes of young men looking to me as a father figure and asking me, how do we grieve? How do we get through this? And so this is why this quote was so striking to me. And, you know, this is also against the background of, I've been really lucky to have a podcast and write some books and get mentorship and spend time with, I hate long lists like this, so sorry to do this to everyone, but, you know, this is the level of people that I've managed to have access to and seek guidance from. And so, you know, whether you're an NBA fan, you know, people like Joe Dumas is obviously you know, a legend of the sport. Ralph Kruger's at the Sabres now. I spoke to him at length when he was at Southampton Football Club. If you're a rugby guy like Jack, you know, there's names like Scott Robertson and Stuart Lancaster. And these were the people that I started calling around. Like, how are you guys doing? I was struggling with Ned's passing, COVID, my own identity, some of just struggles of kind of having spare time all of a sudden, sitting on the balcony at the start of COVID, not knowing what to do, staring off into the sky. And then when you call someone like Jay Triano in the NBA or John Herdman at Soccer Canada, exactly the same problems, which I found remarkable, actually. Finally, with some time to pause, the people that you see on television every single day realize that they were struggling with exactly the same things. I've been making this up for 20 years as a head coach, or I'm struggling with my identity, or I'm drinking too much because I've got spare time, or I don't know how to lead people through this traumatic experience. All the same things that I was going through on an elite amateur level, the top people, the top of the top who have all the resources in the world were struggling with exactly the same things. And so I wrote a book about it. The book's called The Tough Stuff and 7 Hard Truths About Being a Head Coach. And it really steps through all of these things that I've just mentioned. And we're going to go through a couple of examples, and I'd love you guys to chime in whether you've had similar experiences. And then we can really talk about how we might be able to prepare ourselves better. Because the one thing is, the pause obviously has brought a lot of this to the forefront for us, but it's also given us an opportunity to change and to prepare ourselves better in the future. Because whilst everyone else on planet Earth wants to go back to the old normal, I don't want coaching to go back to the old normal. That was not healthy for us. We are not doing this well, and we can be so much better, and we can be so much more impactful if we prepare ourselves and we help ourselves, really. And so this is my call to action. The book is a call to action to us as coaches to change this for ourselves, because no one is coming to our rescue. We need to take a stand together and come together and make the change for ourselves. So let me tell you some stories that came out of the book that I told. Up in the top corner there, wearing the Atlanta Falcons gear, he no longer wears that gear because he was fired, Dan Quinn. When I spoke to Dan, one of the things that he told me was quite impactful, actually. So Dan had never been a head coach at any level, high school, college, amateur, his daughter's team, until he got to the NFL. The first role as a head coach he ever had was at the very, very top. He says that I'd never called a timeout in football before until I got to the NFL. He didn't even know how to do this properly. But what he said to me was, as I was paying attention to what happened when I joined the Atlanta Falcons, a couple of things stood out. The first was that I now had to deal with, here's that word again, the weight, or that phrase again, the weight. I now had to deal with the weight of everyone's livelihoods depending on me as an individual. It's not something that you ever need to deal with as an assistant, but now all of those assistants, all of the staff, all the performance staff, all the psychologists, all the data people, all the people in the front office, it all relies on him and his success. And that creates a weight on your shoulders. And because you care so much, one, about your own performance and about everyone's livelihoods, it actually has a physical reaction. You start to feel the actual weight on your shoulders, which is really, really interesting. And again, something we don't really talk about. And the second thing that he said to me was, the other big change was knowing that someone might come into your office for a 5 or 10 minute conversation, and it might just be another 5 or 10 minutes in your day, but it's the most important 5 or 10 minutes in that other person's day. You have to recognize that because you're the figurehead, because you're the head coach, that person could have been up all night stressing about what they need to walk into your office and tell you. And I think that's really impactful in terms of how we think about our roles and responsibilities and how we approach what we do, particularly as head coaches. And then also for people approaching head coaching, like, this is what you're signing up for. You don't just get to call timeouts and direct and draw X's and O's on the board. You also need to take on this weight. And for him, it was quite stark because he'd never even done it at any other level. So he was learning in the NFL. The bloke at the top in the middle there, very well known in soccer, Arsene Wenger. I wrote a lot about loneliness in the Tough Stuff, and his autobiography didn't quite come out in time for me to mention it in the book, but it's a worthwhile story. In his autobiography, the words lonely and loneliness come up 31 times. So this is one of the most successful football coaches of all time, again, who has all the resources in the world, has been loved and has won everywhere that he's went and had a magnificent 30, 40-year career. But over that journey in his autobiography, which could have been about trophies, 31 times loneliness came up. So this is something that we need to deal with, because what we've been trying to do is solve loneliness with companionship. And that's not necessarily what's going to solve the problem. In fact, there's actually research that's come out that's talked about how job stress is more linked to loneliness. So long hours, job stress actually isolates you more, and it doesn't solve it by just having someone sit next to you or going for a walk with someone. You actually need time to de-stress and actually be alone, which sounds really bizarre. But when you think about it, again, all we've ever tried to do is, oh, I'm lonely. Oh, let's go out for a night of dancing. Let's go to the bar. That might not actually solve the core issue. So in professional sports, where the head coach is around people all the time, there's still a level of loneliness. And so it can't just be companionship. Doc Rivers in the top corner there, again, one of the great NBA coaches. I think he's only in his playing and coaching career over about 31 years. He's only missed the playoffs as a player and coach about 5 years. And so that extra time adds up and it has a physical impact on you. A couple of years ago, he actually coached for about 2 months with a parasite. He was on IV drips to stand up for the 2 hours of the game. But other than that, he essentially couldn't move. Now, there's a problem that needs to be dealt with in pro sports and in the NBA. How that was allowed to happen is beyond me. But the lesson, the flow-on lesson, I think, to all of us is this is impacting our physical health. So, what we call the obsession and the drive and the long hours and, the 3 a.m., watching film is highly, highly detrimental to our physical health. And that needs to change. I can't believe either the club or the NBA or the doctor or someone didn't step in and say, you can't coach. And so there's guardrails that need to be put in place there as well. Bottom corner, Jill Ellis, one of only 2 head coaches that's ever won the FIFA World Cup twice. The other is an Italian coach by the name of Pozzo from 1930 and 1934. So one of the 2 most successful international football coaches of all time, Jill Ellis, doesn't rate winning 2 World Cups as her crowning glory of her sporting career. What she rates as the crowning glory of her sporting career, and if you've watched the Netflix documentary with her, you would have seen this, was coming out as gay to her players at UCLA when she was a college coach. Hiding her identity from her team was crushing her. And the ability for her to show up as herself, be with her partner, and raise their daughter as a family was more important to her than winning 2 FIFA World Cups with Team USA. And I think the lesson here around identity is it's really, really detrimental for us to think of ourselves just as coaches. We're not coaches, we're people that coach. Jill Ellis is a human being that coaches. And I think that was the most emphatic story that I could find that someone said, actually, this was more important to me. The ability to just be myself and be a coach was more important to me than the trophies. You very, very rarely hear anyone disassociate themselves from winning as a coach. but she did that, and she did it on Netflix in front of the world. And so, part of this whole conversation that flows onto the, back to the Doc Rivers example, back to the Arsene Wenger example, back to the Dan Quinn example, is who are we as people? And how does that impact who we are when we coach, i.e. do our job, and who we coach? It actually also flows onto this next example, the first bald guy in the middle. If you follow hockey, which I'd imagine most people do, his name's Jim Montgomery. He was fired from the Dallas Stars for being an alcoholic. The Dallas Stars that year which was last year, went on to make the Stanley Cup final. And so one of the most traumatic things in his life was having to go home to his wife and his kids and say, I haven't been fired because my team's underperforming. They made the Stanley Cup finals. I've been fired because I couldn't stop drinking. And this is rife through sport. And it's probably the biggest pandemic before the pandemic, if we were being honest. And it's driven from fear, and it's driven from pain, and it's driven from not being able to deal with our emotional states in a high stress environment. So again, just an example that kind of got swept under the rug, but I think it's important for us to talk about why he was let go. He was given opportunities. He's been very public about it. Dallas have been very public about it, but still there's only about 2 articles written on it. He couldn't get the help that he needed to get off the booze. That cost him his job, probably cost him his career. We could have done something. We should have done something. Similarly, the bloke in the bottom corner here, the second bald guy, I'm sure not many people will recognize him, but his name's Reese Shaw. Very famous in AFL circles, in my circles. He's from the famous family. His uncle played, his father played, his brothers played. They all played 200 games, which is a lot in AFL. 1 year as a head coach, and he stepped down. The story goes, he basically checked himself into hospital. He was about to have a mental breakdown and potentially kill himself after 1 year as a head coach. And from someone like this, it's particularly interesting because there is no one better geared to understand the demands of being a head coach than someone from his family. All they've ever done, all they've ever been around is Aussie rules football. And so the support infrastructure was nowhere to be seen from the club. So they couldn't even get him through his first full season in charge before he had to step down and say, I can't do this anymore. And so one, it's devastating for him as an individual that he doesn't get to do that anymore. And two, I think it's devastating that we didn't find support infrastructure for someone like him. Highly regarded as a coach, absolutely loved by the players, ticked every box, was a great developmental coach for a young team that was kind of down the bottom, was trying to rebuild itself, the perfect person. And we couldn't put enough around them to allow them to do what they love doing and have impact on the people around the football club. And so here's the first reflection. Given everything, which, I understand this has been quite heavy up until now, but if these same problems that I've just talked about, loneliness, identity, if they were being faced by our athletes, how much time, energy, and money would we spend trying to put support infrastructure around them? If the things that I've just talked about, loneliness, emotional weight, identity, alcohol, if any of our players went through any of that, we would break the bank. We would drive to their house. We would put all of the time and energy of all the support staff to help them out. And the reason I think it's worthwhile reflecting on this is because we need that help as well as coaches. their performance is dictated by us on a number of fronts. On field, definitely, but who we are as people is the greatest impact on who they are. If you know anything about contagion theory, it's that you become the people that you spend time around. Scientifically proven over and over and over again in behavioral studies. Who you spend your time with is who you become. So why do we think that it's different for head coaches? When you give them curfew and then you slink into the bar in the hotel for 6 beers before bed because you're too stressed and you can't sleep without a beer, they start to become that. Those rules start to decline straight away. The respect starts to decline. So we need to be partners in performance with our athletes, not adversaries. We can't continue along this path that we were on of doing, having rules for us and rules for the team. We got to be in this too. And so I've got 3 questions, and I'd actually love to open it up after this, and I might need to unshare myself, but just spend 20 seconds. There's 3 questions, but the first one is, what can you change today? Like, what do you know needs to change in your own coaching? I think it's worthwhile either writing it down, popping it in the chat, or think about it in your head. And then I'd love to walk through some with you guys and have you talk it out. But what's one really easy thing that you could change that you know needs to change for you personally? I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see the chat. All right, Steve says, take a breath. Steve Morley, what do you mean by that? Do you want to unmute yourself, Steve? I can see you.
Sure. Well, I spent a lot of time with junior high and senior high aged athletes, and they get, and I had practice last night, and it was a really positive experience just in the warm up. And there was this beehive of activity where everybody was talking at the same time, and it was just fun to be around. And it'd be great to bottle those moments and sell them. What's just as important though is, we have them all revved up and then we're about to work out. It's like, okay, we want you to take a pause. You also, as the coach, have to take a pause. And that's something that's really easy to forget. And there's one of them now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. I'd love, Ashley, I love your one in there. I'd love to get more from you. Less guilt while in rest mode.
Sure. Hi there. So I find the brain fog has been really kicking in hard these past few months. And I find that I feel like I have so much to do in my day, and that when I try to take a second to rest for myself, I'm constantly thinking about, oh, I should be doing this. I should be doing this, even if it's just I should just be folding that laundry and putting stuff away, let alone the actual work I have to do. And so I find when I finish rest, I'm not actually rested because I've just been sitting and stressing and thinking about what I need to do.
Yeah. It's a hard one, isn't it? I struggle with this too. And don't get me wrong here. I'm not perfect at any of these things. I think, and maybe we can talk about this, how do we get those boundaries in there? Because I think this is a really important one. There's, on one side, you kind of need to be available to your team for whatever they need. But on the other side, there's being unavailable, and there's power in that, and there's power in the rest mode that we talked about. So has anyone done that well, or maybe even done it badly and tried something that they wouldn't recommend so that everyone can learn from that in terms of putting boundaries in place? I'll open that up. It's an open question.
I'll give it a go. actually. I'm not actively coaching right now due to work commitments. But you talk about being emotionally unavailable. I was just recently called out by my other half about being emotionally unavailable. And when I say that, I've worked 19 of the last 20 days. It's unfortunately the time of year for my work, which is part of the reason I'm not coaching right now, is due to I'm one of those people, I'm all in or I'm not in. And I think one of the comments that Ashley made that I really liked was, you're always, what about, I've got this and this and this to do. But the other thing is, and looking at some of the other comments that struck me, was listening to oneself. Okay, taking time for me and saying, okay, I'm done, I'm toast, I'm no good to anybody, and just backing away so that when you come back to the team, you're there.
100%. A couple of really great, easy examples that I've heard of around this, around putting boundaries in place for yourself, is using your staff. So it doesn't, if you have staff, it doesn't need to be you that's always available. So, you don't need to be on call 24/7. That's not really necessarily part of the role. I understand the temptation to take care of everything, but I disagree that it needs to be that way. Someone from our staff needs to be available, but it doesn't always need to be you. And so I think that delegation and that trust and giving people that trust is actually beneficial to everyone. Assistant coaches, team managers, other staff, the kit person, whatever it may be, they can help shoulder that load as well. And I think if you can approach it in the sense of, particularly as a head coach, I know I'm angling more at head coaches than other types of coaches, but you're hired for your brain. Your ability to think and problem solve and decision make in high stress environments is your job. And so if they can understand that, the need for you to rest and the need for you to go into rest mode and to take care of your brain is heightened. So you need that time away so that you can make better decisions. And then the second one, which is just really easy, is like use your out of office. Like put a little message in there on your email, like, hey, I'm in rest mode. It fires something back to them to say, look, I'm unavailable right now, but I'll be back in the morning. Simple one. Everyone has it. You've all got your out of office. Flick it on, put your phone down, go and read a book, go for a walk with your partner, whatever it may be. Love this conversation. I don't want to kind of wrap up unnecessarily. Does anyone have one last comment on that? Anyone want to share anything?
Cody, we just had Nina ask, she wants to hear a little more about what Jack means when he said change of the goalposts if needed. Jack, if you're willing to share a little more.
Thanks, Nina. Yeah, I guess firstly, I think there's Cody, I know you said at the start that it was a bit heavy. Good. I mean, if people have taken time out of our days to come and do some professional development, we could spend 25 minutes about talking about how wonderful things are or kind of the positives about all of us as coaches, which is important at times. But for me, going to that place pretty quickly was something that I think was a big positive, and looking insular about the heavy things that have gone on, and I think we always ask our athletes, and we always have said to our athletes over the last year to take a bit of time and to understand that everybody is everybody's not going through norms. Everybody is working together, and everybody has difficulties in their life, and family difficulties, life difficulties, work difficulties. Everything has changed for everybody. So for us, it's the same as coaches. Like, why are we showing Why are we trying to carry on as business as usual? So understanding, allowing for that little bit of vulnerability, but without taking over with it, but allowing for it, and to actually take time to actually say, yeah, this does suck. Yeah, it's not great there, but I think that builds up your environment a little bit more. What I said about the changing of the goalposts is, for instance, with my team, we were focused on the World Cup, and that was the be all and end all. And we were kind of guaranteed that we were, as much as we could in today's world, that we were always told that the World Cup is going to go ahead. We had confirmation from the New Zealand government, and it was, yeah, this is going. And so the only thing that we gave to our athletes was that, let's get there. So when we got an announcement out of the blue that it was gone, when other tournaments were actually confirming that it was going ahead, and it was only a couple of weeks ago, I think as a staff, our reflection was we only had one goalpost. So we were only aiming for that one thing rather than appreciating the near wins that we could have. Could you be the most skillful player? Could we be the most knowledgeable team in terms of watching the game of rugby? So I think in our training sessions, we set ourselves KPIs. We set ourselves targets. Why aren't we doing that in the season format? So if we are setting goals in our training session, we might get there, or we might in the middle, we might go off in a different direction. And that's something that's an opportunity for a coach. So why don't we change the goal? If we can change the goalposts in a smaller training session, why can't we do it then in while working with our athletes in terms of goal setting? Hey, we're not going to get your PB in this. That's okay. But what else are we going to get from it? And I think that's kind of what I meant by it, changing the goal.
I'd love to hear if anyone else has a similar story around goals and goals that went away, because I certainly did. Like I said, we had our hotels booked, had our squad picked, had done all our player surveys, had all our numbers picked, jerseys were at the printer, about to get on a flight to Australia, which would have changed everyone's lives. 3 weeks for our guys as essentially professional athletes playing against the best, or some of the best 25 countries in the world. Has anyone else had any particular struggles with things going away, goalposts changing?
Cody, I know this group is quiet right now, but I know we have had a lot of discussions around it. We've had, like, at the provincial level, so Canada Games, a lot of coaches are involved in Canada Games programs and Canada Games. It moved a year, but it changed what a lot of coaches were doing. And then, of course, within our sports center, the Olympics. So the Olympics changed, and then it became a maybe, and that affected a lot of coaches as well. Two major events for so many sports that moved.
Yeah, big time. I think it's an interesting one, and maybe we can move on after this, but I think this has had the biggest impact on coaching, in that because we'd had it so good and so uninterrupted for so long, we could all rely on those patterns as motivators for teams and individuals. Every 4 years, Olympics, blah, blah, blah. For us, every 3 years, or for, seasonal sports, let's work towards, let's get into the playoffs, or let's push, we're in the playoffs, let's push towards championships. And I hope in our new normal, we have a think about that now that we've gone through this uncertainty, and whether that was the best way. And I'll give you one example that I've stolen, and feel free to steal from me, is what has become one of my personal values, and then by default, one of the values of our team, is to be elite learners. I stole it from the Australian cricket team, so you're more than welcome to re-steal it. To be elite learners. So to Jack's point, that never ends. we can always learn more. I can always learn more about coaching. The players can always certainly learn more about Aussie rules football. There's always things that we can learn, keep re-upgrading ourselves. And I think the pairing of those two words is the power in them. And it's elite learning. Because we do want to win. We want to progress. We want to be the best at what we do. But now we can apply it to learning. And we know that's going to have an impact on the field. Let's push on to the next one. What can you ask for help with? So it's a little bit of a flow-on question. What can you change? And then given everything we've talked about, what can you go and ask for help with? The reason this is a big question, as the title says, is because we don't ask for help. I think, one, leaders in general are terrible at asking for help because we have this idea that we need to be gods and we need to be superheroes and we need to have all the answers. So why are we asking for help? But I believe it to be the other way around, in that we should be the ones asking for help the most, whether it's to free up time, whether it's to free up that mental space that we need, whether it's to just be better at delegating opportunities to other people so that they can be elite learners, or that players can take on the warm up for your team rather than you having to be there because you've got to drop your kids at daycare. Whatever it is, what can you ask for help with? And as you think on that one, I'll loop it back to what we were talking about before. I think at the interview phase and at the early stages of taking jobs, we need to do a better job of asking for help with what I've been talking about today. How is the organization going to help me with support infrastructure around my performance, around the emotional weight that I'm about to take on as part of this role? This is the question that I get asked the most, is when do you seek out how the organization feels about your performance? And I believe it needs to be upfront. I believe we need to have conversations with the president, the CEO, the director, the NSO, whatever it may be. I bring this to the table as a coach. I believe that I can help this team or these teams or this program, but there's a bit of a trade-off there in that I need some help from you guys as well. And I think those, like anything, like dating someone new, those conversations are always best when had up front. And so I know that becomes risky for some people. They think, I don't want to ask too much. I don't want to prod. I don't want to put too much pressure on them. I really want this job. But again, this is our opportunity to change the conversation here, because coaching was not going well. It was not being done well. We weren't optimized, and we have an opportunity now to optimize ourselves. We know all the lessons because we give all the lessons to the athletes. We know the impact of sleep. We know the impact of time off. We know the impact of barriers. We know the impact of alcohol. We know the impact of loneliness. It can't just be for the players. It needs to be for us, and it needs to be us that asks for help. So I'll unshare myself again here. What can you ask for help with? Could be to anyone. Could be to your mum. I'd love some. Who wants to unmute and chime in? No one has anything. Yeah, Natasha, absolutely. All the stuff at home.
I guess I have something I could talk about.
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
I recently joined a new coaching team, and I don't particularly agree with one of the coaching styles of one of the coaches. It completely goes with against my.
This isn't going to be easy because these are all learned behaviors just like everything else. We've taught ourselves this. We've taught ourselves that this is leadership and this is what is needed for you to excel. And when we start poking around, I think we've realized that that's not necessarily true, but that doesn't mean that it's easy for us to just flip the switch and start saying no to things and leave, not watch film until 3 a.m. And all these different things. And, there's environmental factors, there's other people involved in a lot of the team sports that I've described, and a lot of the conversations that I have with pro coaches is the game actually dictates a lot of the stuff. They want to make changes, but the game expects a certain type of training session. Like a training session has to look like this in the NFL, is like this mindset collectively from the game. And if you try and change it, everyone's sitting up in the stands, the media, all the other coaches are like, this guy's got no idea what they're doing. And so this is what I mean. It's not going to be easy for us to change these things, but I think coming together, judo and rugby and swimming and Aussie rules football and all of us together collectively supporting each other starts to become a powerful voice that we can do this together and we can help each other. Because I'm sure every sport is exactly the same. I'm sure a judo training session needs to look like X, right? It's written in the book like this and everyone has this predetermined thing. But Steve, have a no day. Yeah, it's one way to do it for sure. Patrick, I'd love to hear more about what you've put, asking the athletes what they think are reasonable boundaries for respecting the coaching time and role.
Sure. I think athletes will often overstep boundaries or over-demand of coaches just because they sincerely want to improve. They want to get better and they want your knowledge and time. And I think they unwittingly overstep and ask a little too much for a little too long and really stretch out the day. And I think asking them, is this reasonable? Is then we're getting a bit of buy-in from them because they're actually setting those boundaries and rules, and they're starting to develop some empathy for the coaches. And I think our day and age, there's a lot of empathy to the athletes and expectations for us to really look after the athletes, but sometimes it may not be coming back the other way. So I think that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, brilliant.
And Cody, I can give a little example to Vanessa's point at the community coach level. So I feel the saying no thing, it is such a great momentum builder. So Vanessa, I would agree. I struggled to do as a performance coach. I don't think I ever did it. I just was flat out all the time and then was quite tired all the time. But I've run a snowboard club for 13 or 14 years now. And it was about 2 years ago when I had my second son, I finally tried to say no. And it was, I knew I was at my capacity. I actually got so frustrated I was going to close my club. And it wasn't because I didn't love it. It was too much. Like I knew I couldn't be there. So that year I basically said to my coaches, I have 4 coaches. I said, we're either not going to do this anymore. Like I'm done, or you guys are going to do it. So I sort of said no by saying, I can't be there anymore. I can't do this. I will do, and I gave them pretty good guidelines on, I will do the website. I'll do the admin. I'll do the registration, but you're all going to have to do the events. You're going to have to do the coaching from start to finish. You're going to have to sort everything out. You're going to have to do the rest. And that first year, of course, I got a lot of questions, and I think it took almost just as much time of back and forth. But it's been amazing over the last 2 years. Like this year, the only time I went and did anything with my club was when I wanted to. And they're running everything out fully on their own. They've created new programs. We have more membership than ever. But it took 2 years. Well, it took 10 years of me saying yes all the time. And then a couple of years of me saying no. And I find now it's so much easier. So even an example recently was I was taking my daughter to one of the events. We had like tons of people registered. And they said, can you throw the PA in your car? And I thought, well, that means I'm throwing a generator, the PA, all the equipment. My daughter, no. And I'd never said no before, like in that, like, can you bring this of the club gear? And I said no. And it actually felt so great because they all went, oh yeah, you're right. That would be really hard to do with all the other stuff you have to do. And it was just such a relief. So I think now the more I say no, the easier it is to say no. And there's lots of great things happening. So yeah.
Can I ask a question to that, Natasha?
You sure can.
Sorry, I'm going to training, so I had to change. So you got confidence to say no when you had your second child.
Yeah.
And I guess from my side of things, I don't have any kids, and the empathy from other coaches or other staff or the athletes themselves, it's more understanding when people have a family, and if they're putting pressures on two people, and for me to say no when someone else has said yes with a family, there is way less understanding and way less empathy. So I guess the question to the group is, like, is there more pressures there without the family, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I'm going to say I totally think you're right, Jack, and it's unfortunate. And none of my other coaches have kids, and I feel like they are still always saying yes. So yeah, if anyone can speak to that, that would be amazing, because I think you have hit the nail on the head.
And if I have to adopt a child for this, maybe that's the way to go.
Wouldn't recommend that. Yeah.
I have 5. You can borrow one of mine.
I think it's a family thing, but it's also it's not just a family thing, Jack. It's also an age thing, I believe, at sometimes as well. In terms of as when you're younger, or you're trying to develop, or you're trying to move along, or you're an assistant coach wanting to be a head coach, you do feel a little bit more pressure to say yes at times, depending on the circumstance that you're in. And you expect, as someone that's sort of gone through that process, you sort of expect at some points that they will answer yes to taking that session on Friday nights, or doing those things that might disrupt the balance and we chalk it up to what's your experience. It's what we had to do. So I think the family is definitely a piece for sure. And as someone has a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, I didn't really understand that until I did have a family. And then even through COVID, if we're going to blend the two questions together, just like you made you recognize the balance of your life that maybe was tilted off to one side, because that coaching identity kind of went away to a large degree during COVID times. You were a supporter, you weren't running sessions. You mean, like in my world, I still had to recruit, but even that slowed down. And you actually saw like the balance was out of whack. So when you came back, to try to keep that in perspective, instead of just going 100 miles an hour and saying yes, and be like, okay, family, I had all that time with you last year. Now I have to go back and do my job the way it's capable of. It's a bit of give and take.
Yeah, I think all those things are true. I would agree on definitely the age and the family and certainly COVID. I think essentially the good thing about the break of COVID is that I think it's recentered around, like, everyone has a family that they are now concerned about, right? Whether it's, my whole family's in Australia, my wife's family are in Ireland. So me having kids now is like, no, I'm going to say no or take breaks because of my broader family, right? It's not just my kids. So hopefully that can change. One thing I was thinking, I want to show you kind of what I think the future holds, because I know I've got 1 minute here, but just to round out this conversation, I think it would be really interesting to present to your teams or your athletes what it's like to be you and your role, and do that for them in performance terms. So again, we know all the secrets, and we want to be partners in performance, not adversaries. And so you can talk about, how do you guys perform when you don't sleep? And then it becomes the same for me. I underperform and I undercoach when I haven't had any sleep, or here's all the things that impact me. I've got to put the amplifier in my back of my car and blah, 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 blah. Actually tell them and show them what it's like, because assistant coaches don't even know what it's like being a head coach. Players certainly don't. They have no idea. They just think you show up and coach them and move the cones around and then pick up all the balls. And if you can show them in performance terms, I can make you so much better if I can just get to this state, they'll respond. They understand performance and data and all the different things that we talk about. So I think that would be really interesting for people. I'll just share one last thing. Oh, I'm not going to rate Canva's experience right now. The last question was, what does a optimized coach look like in the future? But this is really the answer to it, is for all this conversation and all these changes, the coach of the future, I think, is going to be, they're going to identify as a high performance knowledge worker. So that's that brain space that we've been talking about. You're hired for your brain, your decision making, your ability to use thinking to solve problems. And so if we start to look at the high performance world and reapply it to the coaches, rather than them living in a state of depletion, like coaching for 2 months with a parasite on an IV drip just so you can stand up and actually get them to an optimized state, coaching can really have some rocket fuel behind it. Part of that is logging less hours at the facility and protecting time for that optimization. Again, this is kind of team coaches in particular. Football coaches are notorious for this, watching film till 3 a.m. Is emotionally agile. So the ability to, it's not just deal with emotions, it's recognize, give them a name, and be curious about them. You don't necessarily need to judge your emotions. If you get angry, you get angry. I have anger, but it's more so, oh, that's interesting that I got angry then. Like, I don't need that now. Let's park that. That's emotional agility. A little bit like Jill Ellis claims their identity devoid of results. You are not a coach. You are a person that coaches. Is a masterful team builder, particularly of support staff. That's where the magic is. Put a good support staff around you rather than just fishing around for anyone who'll do the job. The teams that are going to win, the teams that already win in professional sports, have the best coaching staffs. It's got less to do with players than you think when you look at the people that are around those players. It's okay to change your mind when you come into contact with better information. If we want to be scientists, that is science. It's not set in stone. We can change our mind when we come into contact with new or better information. That needs to be okay in coaching too. Share and delegate with context. So not just delegate with context. When you just give tasks away and you don't really explain why or what the purpose is, it just feels like from the other person that you're just giving them crap work to do. Delegate with context. Here's why this is important and we need to get it done. And here's why I'm giving it to you, because you're the best person to do it. I want you to be great at what you are already great at. Is brave. This is really to break from the shackles of the game that I was describing earlier. A lot of people have this preconceived notion, this has to be done in this way. It's going to take bravery for us to change those behaviors and then our own behaviors as well and stand up for ourselves. Is an idea thief. What I love about being on a call with 30 different sports is you're all idea thieves. You're all stealing from each other. This can work here. This tactic could work in this sport. This, no day could work over here. This is perfect. We all need to bandy together and steal from each other. And then build connection over cause. Didn't really get into this one, but cause only gets you so far. Right? There's a famous saying from Bill Walsh, the San Francisco 49ers head coach, that when soldiers return from war, you ask them what they were fighting for, and it's never the flag or the Pentagon or anything. It was the person to the left of me and the person to the right of me. They were fighting for the connection, not the cause. And I don't think there's probably ever been a truer statement about particularly team sports, in that no one's doing it for the championship or for the badge or for whatever. They're doing it for their teammates. And so coaches that can really build that connection, that's going to be a huge differentiator in the future, if it isn't already. Please, I've loved this conversation. I think I'm a couple of minutes over, so I apologize for that. But I'm very active on Twitter. You can email me anytime. I'll send around these details as well via Natasha. And please do get in touch. Any questions, if you want to argue with me, disagree with me, whatever it may be. I think it's all healthy. So thanks for the invite. And yeah, hope you've got plenty to stew on now after today's session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cody. That was definitely excellent. If anyone has any questions, we'll stay on the line, so you can certainly ask away. I do recommend listening to Cody's podcast. There's some great pieces that kind of dive into some of the stuff that we chatted about a little bit today. And yeah, great stuff, Cody. I think there was some nice tangible things for us to think about.
Thank you.
So again, we'll hang on. Also, if you guys haven't registered in the coaching conference and you haven't jumped off yet, make sure you register. The early bird ends next Wednesday. So the clock is ticking. You've got lots of thank yous there, Cody. I think I got some private messages as well. People enjoyed the topic and found the conversation meaningful. Is Jack? No, Jack had to jump off. I think Jack had a good point too, Cody. I don't know if you've run into it before, but with the coaches without kids, for example, the say no. Have you heard of any great examples of people doing that, or, you know, just protecting their own health in their own space? And it's easier to use a kid as an excuse for sure. So how do you do it when you don't have that excuse?
I'd be lying if I said that I'd seen it done and done well. I think that's a real struggle. Yeah. I mean, I'm the same. Yeah. You know, I have 50 players and no kids. And so sure, I can use my wife, but even then, you know, there's only so far that goes. Yeah.
Natasha, I'm teaching motivation and emotion right now. So I will tell you, it's funny. We just talked about guilt and associations of guilt. And the biggest thing that you can do to try to relieve that guilt, or even just not feel it, whether you have kids or don't have kids, you just have to reappraise what the situation is. So a lot of the times, if we're feeling those negative emotions, it's that we think we've done something wrong to somebody else. So by saying no, we're wronging the other person because we're valuing their time less, but really, if we just take a second and say, no, my time is valuable, or no, what I'm doing isn't actually causing them any harm, then we're less likely to feel the guilt in the first place. And we're more likely to then continue on with the behavior of saying no or acting in a way that aligns more with what we need as a person.
Right. Okay. That's a great point, Renee. I'll share some of that with Jack, because that's helpful for sure.
And I think that kind of plugs in, Renee, you're spot on. I think that plugs into some of the things we're talking about in terms of, I think, having conversations with your athletes about their expectations of the coaching role on them, and then vice versa in terms of putting that together with, here's what I go through. And so I think, you know, we don't really spend any time doing that. It's just straight into, you know, on-field tactics and blah, 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 rather than, I think you can create that space by just explaining what it's like. And like what your preferences are. We do that with our athletes. We know who the single parent households are. We know who has kids. We know who comes from disadvantaged. We know who needs this learning thing. We know all of that. And then we leave the coaches out of that. And so then there becomes the obligation. Well, you're here to help me. And then I've asked you to help me and you've said no. So I think that's what I mean. We need to do the work there, I think.
Any of you guys that are still on have questions for Cody?
Yeah, fire away.